Speaking of the Supreme Court, former Supreme Court Justice Beverley McLachlin is drilling down on one question: how to curb online hate and disinformation. Can it be regulated? She co-chairs the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression. The organization has spent the last 2 years creating a roadmap to do exactly that. Hi, Ms. McLachlin. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very much for making the time. The commission that you co-chair is set to make some final recommendations to the government very soon. And I wondered if you could first, for our audience, outline as succinctly as possible what issue or what problem those recommendations aim to tackle.
Actually, they aim to tackle the problem that harms on the internet are causing, digital expression, and the harms that flow from it. A lot of it's very, very good, but there are some harms, and countries have to tackle these, as our country is now trying to do.
How difficult of an endeavor is it, given so much of the tensions between the idea of free speech, and we've seen this play out in other jurisdictions, right, and regulation, and then the very tangible effects of that harm in society? How difficult has it been to strike a balance between all those?
Well, it's very, very difficult. And we're just at the beginning now as countries in the West trying to strike that balance. We want to preserve free expression and all the good things that platforms, digital speech, chat rooms, etc., bring us in terms of expanding our expression, which is a constitutional right. But at the same time, it's not a right to use that expression in the ways that harm other people. And the internet has a way of magnifying those harms. We think about, rallying people to terrorist activities or defamation or cyberbullying or pornography. Everything gets wrapped up, many thousands of percents, because it's shared around and sent to different places in an instant. And so these harms are very tangible and real. Very difficult task, though.
What kind of a role, or how outsized a role, do you and does the Commission believe the government will ultimately play in attempting to counter that?
Well, personally, and I think the Commission shares these views, it's very uncomfortable in a democracy to have government censoring. Mm-hmm. They need to set up the frameworks for more transparency, more accountability, and empowering users who actually own their data, which is the big asset all of these platforms have. So governments can set up a framework, a regulatory framework. They can empower regulators we already have, like the Privacy Commission. They can set the framework up, but I do hope we don't get to the point where a government-appointed person is actually, doing takedown or censoring.
And why are you worried about that, and what impact might that have?
Well, I don't think it'll happen in Canada because the first model government brought down was a little along the German lines of takedown, and there was big pushback. And I myself was concerned. What we're advocating now in the Commission is a more systemic approach to allow a measure of transparency into those algorithms and how they can propagate bad things. To enforce the idea of a duty of responsible expression, which the platforms would accept and be bound by, and mechanisms to keep expression free, but curb the most egregious and harmful of expression. And then finally, just empowering users to claim or reclaim their data, to have more portability, to go from different platforms and take their data with them. These are all important rights we think that citizens should have in the digital era. That takes a government framework to help set that up, but I don't like the idea personally of government doing the job of censorship, not in a democracy.
Understood. Ultimately, a lot of this is about safeguarding democracy. And I do want to ask you about a position that you hold and how it kind of fits into the idea of democracy, because there certainly has been some scrutiny over that. And that is, you sit as what's known as a non-permanent judge on Hong Kong's highest court. Two of your colleagues resigned from the court following the implementation of a new national security law that, among other things, can imprison people or allow for the imprisonment of people who advocate for democracy. You, on the other hand, agreed to renew your appointment. Why?
Well, first of all, the court is completely independent of the regime in Hong Kong. The government is something else. And that's just when you need courts, when you have laws like this, when you have governments that might need checking. So the court is completely independent and functioning in the way I am used in Canada, the court's functioning. There's no governmental influence. And if there were, I wouldn't be there. But so far, so good. It's the last vestige, if you wish, of democratic governments and the rule of law. Two justices in England did resign, but all the other external judges, I believe, have stayed on. Certainly a great number of them, all of the ones in Australia, I have stayed on, because we believe it would be the wrong signal to send that there's anything wrong with this court. This court may be called upon to rule on some of these very controversial provisions in the security law, and what they need, what Hong Kong needs, and the bar tells us they need, is that court to remain in place, to remain independent, and remain strong. And as long as that is the case, I think as a matter of principle, I'll be there with them. I will not be undermining it.
Let me ask you just on one of those last points that you made, that there might be an instance in which the court is asked to rule on that very national security law. And I wonder if you were, and you found it, for example, in contravention of the Hong Kong Bill of Rights, do you actually anticipate that that decision would be adopted and implemented essentially by the Chinese regime, which ultimately wrote that law? And
well, that would be, sorry.
My apologies, go ahead.
That would be something we have to wait and see. Obviously, there's no point sitting on a court that is not respected and whose rulings are not implemented. But technically, at least, the Hong Kong government is independent of the central government. And so far, they have committed to supporting an independent court. So we'll see what happens.
With a lot of respect, technically independent is not the same thing as independent, right?
No.
It certainly doesn't appear with the adoption of that national security law that there is much independence anymore of the regime in Hong Kong. And I think that's why there have been questions about your presence there. I do take your point that it could be the last bastion of independence, but do you understand how skeptical people watching could be given what they have seen unfold in Hong Kong?
So far, we'll have to wait and see. But I am perfectly satisfied, 100% satisfied, that I'm not doing anything negative to prop up that regime. And I think that the role of the independent judges may be helpful in countering. History is replete with examples of judges who have stood up to bad laws, and including Canada. Our court would routinely say, this law goes too far, it's not consistent with the charter. That's what Hong Kong needs now. And I'm hoping that it will work out. And when the court makes those rulings, that they will be respected, and that will help the cause of democracy in Hong Kong, which many people are still fighting very hard for, I can tell you that.
Do you think that national security law is a bad law?
I'm not going to comment on it because I might be asked to rule on it. It is a law which the court might have to rule on. But obviously, the place for judges to comment on whether a law is good or bad is not in the media. It is in the courtroom when a case arises. Understood.
And just one final question. If you do end up being part of a decision that rules that law is, for lack of a better term, bad law, in contravention of another one, let's say, for example, is that, and then that is not respected by the regime, is that your red line? Is that where you leave the court?
Well, I would certainly have to consider the implications. I don't see myself sitting on a court that doesn't, whose rulings are not respected. No.
Okay, Ms. McLachlin, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.